Okay, cool. We can move on to actually animating now and creating our own custom animations for the game. So there's a few preparatory things I've done before I have actually recorded this tutorial. So what I did was I created this new animations folder inside our working folder for the weapon, and then I made this folder for the converted animations, which we'll convert later. Currently it's empty. What I did do is I used Bethesda Archive Extractor once again with the animations BA2 for specifically the 44 animations, both first and third, and just exported them using this folder as the destination. And that deposited a sort of, meshes, weapons, etc. Folder path inside here. All I did was I grabbed the first person and animations folders, just cut them, and then pasted them inside this vanilla folder, which I named myself, so they're less embedded and they're easier to access the vanilla animations. And finally we have this, which I'll explain later. But yeah, you'll need to grab some resources off the Nexus. The first one is the biped animation rig, which is the actual rig which we'll be using to animate with. And then there's also the Fallout 4 animation kit, which is a really nicely documented set of tools, which really goes into what I'm about to explain in depth. So if you have any doubts after watching this, definitely read through it and watch the video tutorials which have been provided here. But yeah, credit to MakeCG for the biped rig and Shade Animator for the animation kit. Both legendary modders in my book for supplying us with these resources to use. Right, so yeah, this is what's in the actual animation kit. We've got a few different things that we can use here. The main one is the HKX pack utility, which we'll be using to convert the vanilla animations into actual usable HKX that can be converted into FBX. And we also have various things. These presets, I think we use something else, but yeah. So yeah, moving on. What we should have downloaded is the biped cat rig, and we're going to use the biped cat import file to import the vanilla animations and deal with those, and then later we'll load the actual biped cat file to then load the converted animations onto to actually have a reference. Okay, so let's just open F4 biped cat import. And we don't really do anything here. Oh, I had that open. Just having a bit of a read through before I started, just to make sure I was had everything down. What we want to do is hit export. This is the Havoc content tools, which are also supplied. And we want to convert animation. And we're going to choose a file which we want to convert. So I'm going to choose a vanilla first person animation. I'm going to go with the reload. Yep. And then we're going to write to a certain location. First the binary pack file, which is just the HKX itself. This is another... Oh wait, no, this is the right path. Okay, so we got converted, and we just want to save it as weapon reload, and then hit run configuration, and yep, 0 errors, 0 warnings. That's good. Now we want to save it as a XML, and what this will do is it'll actually let us open the animation as a sort of kind of plain text sort of format, and we can actually read the annotations, which are really important. What we do want to do is change the file type to XML. Actually type it in here so that it exports properly. Now when we look inside our converted 32-bit animations, we actually have both here, the HKX file which we converted and the weapon reload.xml, so let's take a quick look. Keep scrolling until we get to the, yeah, here we go, the actual annotations. So these codes are important for what we're gonna use later. The custom sounds which we're going to use. So if you remember from the audio part, this ID here is actually the ID of a sound descriptor, just like we made for the firing sound, and this simply plays the sound. We've also got some other sort of generic keywords which tell the weapon when. So reload complete is when the weapon, the ammo gets refilled into a weapon. So say you have a magazine with 10 rounds in it, and you fire a few rounds and then you reload. As soon as the counter says 10 again, that's what this triggers. Reload complete, and the magazine is then full. Reload end is different. It actually ends the animation, the reload animation, or rather ends and starts to sort of fade it out in a way. But we'll see all of this later. Okay, so that's useful information that we can use later. What we do need to do now is actually convert this into an FBX. And for that we'll need HKX pack, so let's open that. In the animation kit. Ignore that always happens. And we'll go into our converted animations and then simply drag the HKX, and you can convert multiple files at the same time, and hit convert, and then it'll deposit an FBX in the same directory. So right, we have our FBX. Now we can import it. So let's close this, Havoc Content Tools, don't save the configuration, and we're going to import. The FBX which we just converted with HKX back. So this is important, make sure it says add an update animation. The rest of the stuff isn't really important. I guess you have to have this ticked. Okay. Wow, and now when we scrub the timeline, we'll see that it actually animates. The timeline only goes to 21 by default, but what we can do is we can sort of guess what the end time should be. So there, all I did was you can either right click the play animation button or left click the time configuration and set it here, and just set the end time so that the timeline is actually long enough to contain the entire animation within it. Yeah, we're close, but I think let's go a bit longer than that. Let's say, yeah, 105. Yeah, just to make sure all the movement is stopped. Yeah, okay. So you might notice the arrow is pointing this way, but the body is pointing that way. So what we need to do is we need to rotate the root. So I'm going to open schematic view, go to the root bone, hit E for rotation, and make sure my snap is on, and just rotate it 90 degrees. Okay, there we go. If we, I'll just quickly take a look at the camera. We can actually, I'll choose this. Yeah, it's here, camera. We can see. We can see the reload that way, but we don't need to worry about that right now. All we need to do is export this animation. Okay, so we'll select this bit bone here, just click on the big triangle at the bottom. Then we'll go to the motion tab, and we'll click available and click collapse layers. Frames per sample 1, make sure you have the end time is the same as the overall end time so that we capture the entire animation. Collapse layers, and then we get this collapsed layer. Now we're going to save it as a clip, and what this lets us do is it lets us load that clip into another scene, i.e. our animation scene, which we're going to be using to actually create the animations Okay, so I'll hit this save animated clip here, and then we'll just save it in this default folder. I'll call it 44 weapon reload. And we want to untick this and just make sure we have collapse layer on both. This is fine. And we'll save. Okay, took a sec, but it's done. And we can see the clip down here. Alright, now we can actually open the other file, which is the Fallout 4 biped just cat max. Okay, so this is what it's gonna look like when we're animating effectively. We're gonna select the bit bone and double click the weapon reload clip and make sure we have scale data off. Okay, there we go, it's loaded. And if we go into our alternative views, we can preview sort of what it looks like in first person. So yeah, if I use my actual play button, there we go. That's definitely the 44 pistol reload animation. So at this point it's probably worth taking a look at all the bones, and obviously this is the hammer bone, so we can see that when the thumb pulls the hammer back it turns, and you can see there that's probably a bone for the cylinder because it's rotating. But yeah, that's how we import a vanilla animation into our file ready for reference for our animation. So yeah, the next step is to import our own weapon, and might as well actually save this file. Okay, so we'll save it here as the same name as the actual animation file in the game, the HKX, just for convenience's sake. Alright, so yeah, next step, importing our weapon. Alright, so I did get a bit ahead of myself there last recording. I named the scene weapon reload, and that's kind of getting ahead of ourselves there a bit, so I've renamed it template scene because this is the scene that we're going to be using to base all of our other animations for the gun off, and we need this to be basically our perfect pose, so that when we create the other animations they don't do weird stuff like popping or moving the bones around, because they're all based off this initial pose. Okay, so we might as well import our hunting revolver meshes to actually preview their positions relative to the bones. Okay, so we can just go straight into the game files and just grab. So yeah, so if you remember, I did a version of the receiver which was all sort of fused together so that it wouldn't explode apart based on the vanilla animations, and I also did a custom animation ready, all the meshes under their correct bones ready for custom animation. So all we'll do is we'll delete the old one and rename this NIF like that, so it gets used by the game instead. Okay, so we're roughly there. The gun is in the correct position, and the way the NIFs get imported, they just jump straight into the overall skeleton. So this skeleton down here is essentially the meshes and the skeleton parts. So we don't directly animate these, we instead animate these biped bones down here on the right. And if a bone is highlighted red, or a node is highlighted red, that means it's keyed and it has actual animation keys on it. So yeah, those parts will assign under their specific parts. So we see here the speed loader is underneath the weapon optics 1 bone, and the weapon optics 2 bone is the end of the bullets. What we have here is something similar to what we have in game when the mesh explodes. So all we need to do is fix it. So let's take the cylinder to start with. And let's just highlight all of our bones here. Okay, yeah, so actually the bones are slightly off a bit. So if we were to go up here and click parent space, then we see down here the position of the meshes relative to their actual parents. So if we make sure that all of these are zeroed, just by right clicking the spinners as usual. Did I right click there? No, I didn't. Okay. So the actual receiver again should be zeroed out to its bone. Yeah, in this case the BIP right weapon bone. Let's take a look at the hammer. Which was weapon extra 1. So that's the hammer bone that gets pulled back at the end of the reload. What else have we got? Speed loader, the bullets, which are under weapon optics 2. And I think that's almost everything. The yoke. Okay, so the trigger is not actually separate. I must have forgotten to unlink that. So I'll have to redo this portion again later, or at least re-import the receiver NIF. But for now, let's just move forwards. Okay, so I'm going to grab the weapon magazine bone, I believe, and move it. Oh, actually, I'm already doing things. I need to grab the weapon magazine. Okay, so we're now creating our actual pose. So what we need to do is we need to select everything in the scene and remove the existing keyframes from it. So let's go with -5 start time, 120. So we see here is the collection of the keys that actually moves the weapon. So we don't need these anymore. Let's get rid of them. Just highlight and hit delete. Does take a second. Okay, so if we reopen the schematic view, there we go. It's always a bit unreliable. Okay, right. So now we're selecting the actual biped bones. You see here the bullets are moving with the receiver, the cylinder. Sorry. So let's turn on wireframe view and actually snap to. It seems we don't really have a snap point, but we can still sort of eyeball it. So this is where you'd hope that you'd set up, yeah, you know, vertices in intelligent places so that you could actually snap the cylinder correctly to the object. Let's see if we can't align this. Okay, and then each one of these, let's take these and then actually highlight all 5 casings, and then we need to actually put the casings into their respective holes. Okay. So you probably want it jutting out a tiny bit because the normal maps work better that way. instead of it being flush with the receiver surface. Okay, so number 2, I think it was going around this way. 4 and 5. Okay. Right, let's just align all of these, might as well. On the y-axis, forwards back. And then we can align them. Okay. So that's done. Again, these meshes are just sort of references. When we export the animation, the meshes don't matter. They're just here to help us visualize what the animation is going to look like. So let's change the color of this, just so we can differentiate it from the bullets. Now hopefully, if I just select the... So this was Weapon Optics 2. If I find Weapon Optics 2... Okay, and then just actually align it to the mesh, because the mesh shares the same pivot as the bone, then yeah, we get, yeah, well, mostly lined up. Oh yeah, because we moved the bullet out the back a tiny bit, we do have to sort of move the bullet heads back a bit, just to match where the bullets are now. Okay, so the hammer was Weapon Extra 1. Let's actually move the speed loader out of the way, so that's Weapon Optics 1, I think. It's good to just double check. Yeah, Weapon Optics 1. Okay, so let's actually move that behind the player so that it'll never be seen in the first person animation. In third person, I'd probably hide the bone. Probably way underneath the player, or even maybe inside the cylinder of the gun, cheekily. And then control it using keywords to actually show and hide the bone. Okay, so Weapon Extra 2 is the yoke. Get that out of the way. Alright, so we want to make sure our weapon bone is actually straight, if that makes sense. So we want to make sure that it's not angled in some weird way, which it slightly is, ever so slightly, and that can throw off the positioning of these bones. My bad, I should have figured that out. Remembered to do that beforehand. Okay, so hammer was weapon. Okay, so the yoke we were doing. Yep. So we can just isolate the mesh to make it easier for us. I think I added a... So yeah, about there works. And finally the hammer. I think what I did was I made sure the hammer rotated on this. Oh, but there's no there's no center vert, so I'm just going to have to kind of eyeball it and get it pretty accurate. Okay, and that's the hammer. Okay, so we've mostly got the receiver bones lined up, which are the bones that are going to be animatable and actually matter. So let's bring in, first hit save, and then bring in more meshes. So So let's go for the barrel next. Now these pieces, they don't have animation bones associated with them, just parent bones, you know, like parent barrel, child barrel. So we need to actually align them ourselves, which shouldn't be too hard if, again, you've intelligently placed your vertices so that you can align the meshes correctly. But I mean, this doesn't really matter. We actually, yeah, we can. So I'm going to use the select and link tool and just link the barrel to the receiver. I don't know why it goes blank like that, but yeah. So then when the gun actually moves, if I select the weapon bone, the barrel goes with it, which is good. But what was I saying? Yeah, the meshes are all entirely visual based, so this is here purely so that we can get a sort of an idea for what the gun looks like when it's going to be animated. Okay, so let's bring the grip in. And again, we're going to have to manually, let's actually isolate left view and just bring this up. I think it was here. Okay, and then select and link. All done. So select and link is the same thing that you see in the schematic view. So by linking the barrels and the grip to the receiver, you get this result in the schematic view. With them tiled underneath each other. Oh yeah, currently the schematic view is in hierarchy mode. Before, in 3ds 2013, I'd have it in a references mode, but because there are so many nodes in the scene, I thought I'd have it in hierarchy mode instead. It is like that by default, so it just makes sense to me to animate like this, and then in 3ds 2013 to have it the other way. Okay, shaping up. Let's bring in the iron sights. Okay. I believe the attach point was just on this corner here, yeah. Looks right to me. Okay, and then link. Alright, so let's just quickly take a look at where the meshes are actually coming in from. So I had the cat layer selected, which was a bit of a mistake for bringing in these bones. I probably should have made a new layer and then made it active so that as soon as these meshes came in, they came into their own layer. So let's try and select all of the weapon bones, and then let's go with a new layer called weapon mesh. What we can do is we can actually lock this layer so that when we're going to select bones and things, we don't accidentally select parts of the mesh. Okay, so let's bring in the long scope. Now the reason why I'm bringing in multiple scopes is because we need an idea for where the hand can and can't go in the animation. So for example, if I was to close the cylinder with my left hand, once I do the animation, it can't go over the receiver because the long scope might be there in the way, you see. So, right, this might be multiple nifs under the same, yeah, so it is. So what I'll do is I'll parent the iron sights to the long scope, and then going to have to unfreeze the layer to actually be able to snap stuff. Okay, perfect. And then select and link the. Actually, because we're in. It's a bit strange. Look into that after. Because we're in 3DS, I can actually just delete this iron sights because if I'm in the weapon mesh layer, I can just independently hide or unhide the iron sights, irrespective if the long scope is hidden or not. So yeah, it's not like it's in the game when the iron sights have to be associated with the long scope. Yeah, seems like it's in line. I'll have to check that out later. Might be a problem with the long scope NIF. Okay, so we can add more NIFs to the scene if we feel that's necessary. But right now I'm happy with this as a starting point. So let's move the right weapon bone. I'm going to go back into world coordinate system and just sort of move it slightly more flush into the hand. That seems good. Okay, hit save again. Now we're going to create a sort of proxy bone system for controlling the weapon. So let's actually, I think to start with, let's go into the schematic view and detach the entire BIP R weapon bone hierarchy. So this right weapon bone no longer gets influenced by this chain, the main skeletal chain. Okay, so let's go into helpers, and I think it's atmospheric apparatus, rather fancy name for just a sphere, but there we go. And I'll align it to the weapon, roughly. Yeah, I think I'll have it on the weapon bone actually. So this placing this bone determines where the weapon origin is, effectively how it will rotate when you do rotate it in the scene. So this is quite important. It's the origin of the scene. Let's call it main controller, or at least try to. Just having a quick think about whether I really want this here. Yeah. I'll just have it aligned with the weapon bone to simplify things. Okay, and then we'll make a point helper. That's back in standard. Point. Okay. Let's have it as a cross type, and then align it to the. Okay, so I think. Oh yeah. We've. I've accidentally put the controllers in the wrong layer, so we'll go back into cap. Now they're editable because they're not in the frozen layer. And we'll have this bone slightly smaller than the other gizmo. Okay, so then we'll call that weapon bone, and then we'll parent the weapon bone to the main controller. Okay, so now we have a sort of main controller bone for the weapon. So now we're going to actually use something called link constraints. So go to the motion tab, assign controller, we'll open this out and click on the animation layer for position, rotation and scale. Click here and then click link constraint. What this does is this lets us dynamically, effectively parent bones to controllers and the like on the fly based on the frame. So we're on frame 0, we want to make sure we're on frame 0, or actually we're on frame -1, and we're going to click the main controller. Oh no, actually, yeah, we want to click the weapon bone. This will become clear later. So you can see here that it's highlighted red now because there's a link. But despite the fact that this right weapon bone is completely disconnected from the weapon bone in the schematic view, we can still now rotate the main controller and the weapon bone inside that controller, and it will control the right weapon. So say we go to frame 5 and say link to world. After frame 5, because we've unlinked it, that should have unlinked itself. Let me see. Oh, it's probably because we're not in auto key mode. Or is it? Okay, got some weirdness, but anyway, that's the general gist of how the linking system works. So I want to delete this link on 5. Not really experienced that weirdness before, but yeah, animation's a big subject and a lot of different little things can go wrong, so we're just gonna keep going forwards and I'll figure that out later why that's happening. Alright, we might as well do the viewports at this point. So I want to customize, or rather configure my viewports. I'm going to choose the double view, go with perspective on the left and camera on the right. Hit OK. That gives us this camera view on the right, which we can sort of go into. I think if I show save frames, there we go. So the camera is set up with a certain field of view. If I select it in the scene, yeah, it's set up with a certain field of view similar to that in game, so we can get an idea for how the weapon's going to look in game based on this. So we could actually change it to 80. I think that's the default in-game field of view. What else is there to do? Right. So we can use this viewport to preview and rotate around the gun, and then this viewport is fixed. You know, I can't move the camera. Alright, so FK versus IK. Forward kinematic versus inverse kinematic. What we have here is... I hit J to get rid of the black brackets, but we actually have a system where, in animation, forward kinematic means that each bone has its own sort of rotation, and you have to individually rotate each bone to animate effectively. Whereas inverse kinematic, if I now set it up, I go to the motion tab, move match IK and FK, and then drag the slider across to fully be 0. You see here it says IK/FK. FK would be 1, IK is 0. So we slide it all the way. Then this handle appears. And what this allows us to do is control the entire arm with just one control, which is very useful. Elbow goes a bit weird, but we'll fix that in a second. By simply moving the elbow controller out like this. I don't want to change the rotation of the arm too much though. So I do like to move my elbow controller slightly far out. So let's repeat the same on the other arm. So match IK and FK and drag the slider all the way to the left. Then we get our other controller. And then we can slide out the elbow slightly outside. You can do the same with the knees, but they don't factor in later. I think the feet are IK by default, or not. But yeah, don't need to worry about that, that's third person animations. And even then we never really animate the legs. Alright, we're nearly there. Let's do a few more things. So this is quite a high poly mesh. This reference mesh that comes in with the animation kit, or rather the biped scene. So let's actually turn it off for now. Turn it all off. What this lets us do is increase the frame rate of our scene because hiding all of that geometry really speeds up the scene because it's not as much to render in the viewport. What we can also do is import, if I go to my resources folder, then I've actually used Bethesda Archive Extractor to export the first person male hands NIF from the game. It's probably somewhere like Mesh's character or something like that. But if we import into here, you see the hands come in and we can actually get a preview of the hands, and these are, you know, a reasonable level of polys so that they won't lag the scene. So if you want to just be animating first person, which we are, having just the hands is a good way to do it. I'll just check which layer those are in. The cat layer. That's wrong. So I'll just quickly whack it in. Shouldn't have opened that layer. I believe it's... Yeah, I believe it is actually this layer. Let me just quickly check. Ah, it's body mesh, isn't it? Seeing as I just hid the meshes inside there. Terrible memory when I'm explaining things clearly. Okay, now that's locked, so we can't accidentally select the mesh. Good, might as well save again. And I think we're about ready to animate. Okay, so not quite ready yet. What I did outside of recording is jump ahead and export this as an idle animation in the game just to check that the bones line up with the meshes as we expect. But they didn't. So the issue I was having is my receiver, the NIF pivot wasn't set correctly. So the receiver, its pivot did not match the parent weapon node in 3DS 2013. So the pivot was somewhere over here, and I had to snap it to the weapon node and then reset XForm, re-export the NIF, and then now in game everything is perfectly aligned. So there's a few more things. Oh yeah, I also, let me just lock the weapon mesh again. I also moved the right arm handle a bit. Just move and rotate it to fit the gun a bit more, and I moved each of the thumb bones just so that they match the grip better. I also moved the left arm just down and out of view. That's all I really did. I just moved it from up here just down to there, so that we have the New Vegas style one-handed operating style. Okay, so let's just step back a frame, select our hand, right hand IK handle, and then go to the motion tab and assign a link constraint to the weapon bone. There you go. And then now when we animate, the hand controller moves properly with the gun, at least as well as it can. You see, when I move it away like that, I imagine that's because the arm is stretching out too far. Yeah, it is. So the IK can only go as far as the hand can stretch out. You might have seen this in some games where your character reaches for an object, but it's just out of view, so the elbow locks and it kind of looks a bit strange. But yeah, that's fine. So yeah, now we if we move the main controller, the gun, I think I've got, yeah, bracketed view on in that mode. The gun moves, and then we can move the secondary, say, I'll call it a jiggle bone, independent of that weapon bone, to add further secondary motion in animation. Okay, another thing we can do is to create selection sets. So let's first select all of our gun controller biped bones, our main controller and weapon bone, and let's say, what else have we actually got here? Maybe the fingers, yeah, the fingers as well. Or actually, I'll leave the fingers unselected, and we'll use a separate selection set. Let's go with this, and the elbow constraints. Okay, and that gives us... Did I directly select the... I might have directly selected the hand bone, which is a mistake. Yeah, I think I did. Okay. And we'll type in to the top here all handles and hit enter. Now, all we need to do is go to this drop down, click the all handles, and it'll reselect all of the handles for us. Let's do the right arm fingers. So the numbering here, you'll notice it's like 1, 1, 1, 2. This is just to show the bones in each hand. So if I isolate the fingers, the index finger starts with 2. The thumb is actually, so if I might as well select them all. Okay, the finger 1 is actually the thumb, the initial thumb bone. And so finger 1, 1, 2, 1, 3 are the different joints. Again, I'm over explaining this, but 3, all of the 3s is the end, the tips of the fingers. So if I wanted to select the tips of all of the fingers, I just select down here. If I want to select the last 2, I just select like this, and etc. So what I like to do is select all of the fingers and just go right fingers, and then select all of the fingers including the thumb and type right fingers all. This way, usually the thumb is independent of the fingers generally when I'm animating. So now we can either select the fingers or all, and we'll do the same for the left fingers. Okay. Left fingers. Okay, so what I've made a bit of a typo there. I'll fix that in a second. So to actually modify these selection sets, I think we go to Edit, Manage Selection Sets, and then we can rename and actually fix that naming, which is good. And this we can also add and remove selected objects. It kind of works like the layers, in which we can select objects and actually add them to these selection sets. So don't panic if you named it wrong or didn't get all of the controllers which you wanted. You can easily add them in later. And this is purely to just help us select handles if we want to move keyframes along the timeline easily. Like retiming the animation is a good example. If we wanted to make the weapon move slightly later, we could just select all the handles and just move them, and the whole animation will be retimed rather than just one part, and then we'll have to match it with the others. Okay, so far, let's go back to 0 for the start time. We've been not actually adding any keyframes at all, and that's because we're positioning the gun ready for the idle pose. I think before we actually create an idle animation, that is the sort of slow breathing up and down motion that you get on guns, we'll actually just export the idle animation to see what it looks like in game, which I did earlier, and really helps to make sure that everything is lined up, and this what you're getting here matches what you get in game. So let's hit the export button up here. Make sure we're in animation export first person, and so this will go through a few stages. So this will trigger each one of these in turn. So we have just various things like aligning the scene. This is important. So the skeleton, it has to reference a sort of text file that contains all the bones, and it's going to be looking in the current directory. And that's why we have the Fallout 4 rig first.txt in the same directory as all of our animations save files. So I can probably actually delete. I'm obviously using iterative save on the animations here, and I will be in the future. And it's fine to keep a few backups of the scene, like the last few iterative saves of it, rather than, you know, from 0 to 20 or whatever. That's just how I like to do it. So we have the txt here, and it's going to find that. And then all these other ones you don't need to really worry about. But this one we do. So we want to export as a certain into a certain directory. And what I've done is I've created a finished animations folder in my work folder. And in here I'm going to be pasting the HKX files, and then using this shortcut to actually go straight to my Fallout 4 data, meshes, actors, etc. path to then save over the vanilla animations. Now the reason why I put the folder here instead of nested inside here is because the Havoc Content Tools has a weird sort of path issue where it can't export or import or any of that stuff, files that are too sort of deep in the drive, at least for me, for some reason. So if you're getting some weird errors, try exporting to a shorter address, or even to the desktop, because that's usually what I have to do with third person animations, is I have to export to the desktop for it to actually work. Okay, so I know the vanilla animation is called weapon idle ready, so I'm going to save over that, run configuration. Only 5 warnings, that's good. That's what we expected. I don't know why I closed my folder. We'll reopen it again. Okay, so we have the exported file here. We'll just go through to our correct path for the first person animations and overwrite. So here, yeah, I'll explain these A, B, C, D later. So let's take a look in game and see what the result is. Okay, awesome. So we're in game. Oh, I'll explain that in a second. And we can see that our meshes line up well. If we expand the field of view, I actually type FOV 120, and we can see that the extra fingers. There's no real way right now to sort of pop out the camera and sort of float around the first-person animation, because it's not the same thing as. So if I hit TFC now, you see the gun disappears and I can't see it. There's no way to really sort of rotate around the animation. So we'll be creating a sort of template or like a test animation later to make sure all the pieces are moving properly. But yeah, why is my gun exploding every now and then? It's because as well as weapon idle ready, which we've exported correctly, there's weapon idle ready A, B, C, and D. And these are sort of little fidgets, if you will, of the gun, sort of, you know, the character sort of moving the gun in their hands, because you know if you're holding a gun in real life, you're not going to be holding it perfectly static at all times. There you go. Nice little inspect animation that ruins the gun. But we'll be what we can do to rectify that is to actually copy the weapon idle ready animation and just paste it a few times and actually name it ABCD, so that it overwrites the idle fidgets, let's call them. Okay, so it looks good. That's really the only reason why we're in-game, is to check that our viewport lines up with what we have in-game. So yeah, it looks good. Let's move on. Oh, actually, yeah, I might as well say, so as soon as I start moving or doing anything else, obviously the gun pops, and that's because we're back to 44 vanilla animations. The only, let's say, hunting revolver compatible animation which we have so far is the idle. So that's why it only really works when the gun is still. Okay, so just one or two more things before we move on to actually animating the idle. I want the cylinder to swing out with the yoke when the yoke rotates the BIP weapon extra 2 bone. So let's get that done. So the cylinder is on the weapon magazine bone, and let's select the weapon extra 2 bone, and then isolate. And then we want the magazine bone to be linked to the weapon extra bone. So let's create a link constraint and add a link on frame -1, the preparation frame I like to call it. Now it's actually moved back to the world origin, and this does, or roughly, this does actually happen sometimes when the parent object of an object changes. So what we need to do is save the position of this bone by creating, let's say, a dummy. Just drag it out and then align it. So that's that. The dummy will take the place of the, I think I put it in another locked layer. The dummy will take the place of the bone. So now when we select the bone, you have to reassign the link constraint when you undo it. It's a bit annoying. Now we can select the bone and simply realign it back to where it was using the dummy, and then delete the dummy. So now, hopefully, when the yoke swings out, the cylinder will as well, but the bullets don't. So I'll have to parent that as well. So the casings do, but the bullets don't. So I think the bullets are on weapon optics too, aren't they? Let's find weapon optics 2. Yeah, the bullets are on weapon optics 2. Okay. So same process. I think what I'll do is I'll parent the weapon optics 2 to the weapon magazine so that the bullets can rotate with the cylinder, rather than parent it to weapon extra 2 with the yoke. Okay. Once again, I'm talking over myself and talking while I do things and forgetting what's assigned to what. Okay, so weapon optics and weapon magazine. Alright, so that's slightly off actually. Just make sure we're correctly aligned here. Sure looks like it. Oh, no we're not. Alright, so let's take the weapon optics 2 bone and just align it to the weapon magazine, and there we go, our bullets are perfectly in line. Good thing I checked that. There'd be no way to actually tell in first person, at least with the cylinder blocked. There's no way to rotate the camera around, but it's good that I stumbled upon that. Again, I'm trying to move fast, and mistakes are bound to happen. Okay, so we have the 2 bones here. Are they perfectly in line? One might be out of rotation with the other ever so slightly. So this time I'm going to actually toggle these rotational alignment on so that it matches the rotation as well. Okay, so we have weapon optics 2, link constraint, add a link to, hopefully this works, weapon magazine, perfect. Oh, and we can move it back a frame actually. There you go. We don't even really need the preparation frame visible to move frames back into it. So if all goes to plan, this rotates out. Oh, where'd the bullets go? Oh no, I think the same thing has happened again. Yeah, it has. Okay, so this time all we really need to do is go back and align to the weapon magazine bone. So yeah, I just align the weapon extra 2 bone to the weapon magazine bone, and then the bullets are back where they should be. Might as well freeze again, and this rotates out, and when we rotate the weapon bone, weapon magazine, yeah, the bullets rotate. And the casings as well. Great. Awesome. Right. So that's all set up ready for the reload, because that's only really when the yoke is going to swing out. Alright, we can finally start animating our idle. And to do that, we need to go back to forward kinematic mode, FK mode, because for some reason if you try and animate an IK idle and export it in-game, you get this really bad jitter. So we need to save our scene. Let's call it weapon idle ready, and we're going to be calling all of our animation files as the same animation name as the HKX vanilla files. So for example, weapon reload, weapon sprint, etc. And now we need to effectively reverse our rigging so that we're again working in forward kinematic mode. So the first thing to do is convert these hands back into FK mode. Now, yeah, the hand moves back into a different position due to the location of the handle. So what I need to do is match IK and FK, and then I can slide to full forward kinematic mode, and it won't move the hand around. Okay, so that's done. Now we need to make the weapon follow the wrist. So let's add a link to the wrist. Hopefully that works. Yeah, seems like it did. We can hide these two controllers since they're not being used anymore. Because the only thing that's linked to them right now is the IK handle, but we're not using that. Okay, so if we move the hips, alright, good, that's expected. Yeah, alright, we should be able to actually animate now. Let me just test a few more things. Oh, whoops. Just like the wrist, yeah, okay. Alright, so this should be good to go now. So I'm going to hit N for November to activate the auto key mode. Alternatively, you can just click this key here, this button here, and now every time we move something, if you watch here down where the 0 is, it should add a key. Why is it not adding a key? Okay, well, let's add a key ourselves by clicking the manual add key button. There we go. So I moved the hips there on a certain frame, and a red key was added, which is a position key. If I was to rotate the hips, then a green key appears, and likewise if I rotate, a green appears. If you have both position and rotation keys on the same frame, you have both a red and a green display on the keys here. So we can see that on frame 0, our position and our rotation is saved. So let's open the curve editor. I'm going to use a shortcut from now on, but that's how you open it by default without a keyframe. And we can check here. If I click on the position fields, we can actually see here we have keys for our position on the X, Y, and Z axes. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'll shorten the timeline to just 100 frames. And so with this is going to be a looping animation, and when we do these, we want the start and the end to be exactly the same. That's very important. So I'm gonna take this key at the start, gonna hold Shift, and I'm gonna drag it, which duplicates it, to 100. Okay, so now we can see we have keys at the end and the start, and now instead of this dotted line, we have a solid line indicating a curve. So right, I'm gonna go to frame 50, which is in the middle, and start to slowly lower, and we can see our Z position has actually dropped and the other positions have stayed the same. So every time you move an object in auto key mode, it'll add 3 position keys, and if you ever rotate an object in auto key mode, it'll add 3 rotation keys for each of the axes. And I'll go over manually adding keys to just one of these axes in the future. I might as well cover it really fast now, but you basically click this key button and just click here, and then you're able to add a key purely to this this axis, and you don't have the keys. You don't have the key in the other 2 axes. It's just here. So yeah, that's how you add a single key. But for now, we're fine with just moving and rotating in general. Okay, so let's see what that did. I'll just hit play. It does look pretty goofy in third person, but you can see the effect in first. The gun is, yeah, going up and down like the character's breathing, but the movement is quite exaggerated. So what we'll do is actually reduce that. So if I hold Alt and I zoom out, then I hold Control and Alt and right click, then I can actually change the scale, both lengthways, frequency and wavelength. I don't know. You maybe don't use those terms for curves, but I can change the width and the height of the graph editor here, so I can see more easily where keys need to be. So if I grab the key, I make sure I'm in Move Keys mode, and I hold it down, and if I hold Control, that moves it on one axis, so it works for I think just up and down for now. I wonder if does it work for left and right? Yeah, it works for left and right. So if I hold Control before I even grab the key, then it does work. So what I want to do is I want to reduce this by 50%, so I'm just going to drag it to roughly half. See where that gets us. Still a bit too much, so I'll just reframe the keys and reduce it a bit more. Obviously you can just sit on frame 50 and sort of preview the height yourself if you want. Okay. Alright, and remember we need to view in basically full screen, because in game it needs to be a subtle movement. So it's best to watch the animation as maximized as you can get it. Alright, so let's add a bit more movement. We're going to use the upper arm now. Make sure we have the first frame keyed and duplicate it to the end. And then go to frame 50. And we're going to hit E to go into rotation mode, and then make sure I'm in world view rather than anything else, because if I was in local mode, then you get obviously this this different gizmo which is related to the arm in its current orientation, whereas if I go to world mode, and I do have these different axes actually shortcutted so I can quickly switch between them, but in world mode I can just do a very general movement for what I want. So I have a small dip in the arm. That's probably a large dip. Let's go to the rotation. And we kind of have to... So these keys aren't actually related to the world position. I don't think. These keys relate to the actual local bone. So if we have to move several keys, if that makes sense. So Y isn't doing very much to alter. Z, yeah, it does a bit to alter. And X, also a tiny bit. So let's see what that's gotten us. It's a similar movement to the hips, except this time instead of moving, we're rotating. So yeah, the arm drops a bit. Okay, let's go back to the start of the timeline. And this time we're going to actually edit the wrist. So let's have a key at the start, which we do. Make sure it's duplicated to the end. Now this time I'm not going to go to the middle, I'm actually going to go to the a quarter in and just rotate it upwards, and then down to the 75%, let's say, of the timeline, and actually rotate it down. So what this does is it rotates the gun up when it's falling and down when it's rising. Pretty simple. What we get is a sort of wave type effect. What you notice is the gun actually stops rotating, or rather it evens out and sort of eases, and it isn't quite fluid. So what we'll do is we'll go into the curve editor, and we see here that the key actually sort of flattens out as it goes into, as it loops. If I open, where is it? Oh, it should be called, yeah, it's multiplier. It's out of range types, but I can't really preview it, which is a shame. Okay, I don't think with this curve type it's actually possible to show out of range, but it would preview the curve so that it continued along, and we'd be able to see how the curves lead into the next curve as it loops. So it's a shame I can't really show it, but the point is, instead of going with flat tangents, all we want to do is set linear tangents. So as the curve heads into this one, it carries on into this one in the same sort of direction. I do notice that it's probably actually a bit steeper than, yeah, this curve is steeper than that one. So this curve is about 2.5 quadrants down, whereas this curve is only 1. So we need to actually increase that so that we get more of a movement. Actually, let's decrease them to the same, just so we don't get such an exaggerated movement. I prefer to use these quadrants as a guide rather than the left numbers here, because as you can see they're not really, with these small movements you can't really judge very easily. Okay, right, so let's just take another look at that. I think it's the arm this time. So the arm, or actually, it's another curve which isn't quite smoothing out. Okay, I figured it out. It was the other curves for the wrist. So I'd only set the X rotation, which if we hit E we can see is the forwards back rotation. It's highlighted yellow now, but it would usually be red. So X rotation is usually the front sort of up and down rotation. Y is the sort of roll, and Z is the left right facing rotation. So all we need to do is go into those different axes and straighten them out, and also even out our curves so that they're more similar to one another. Just eyeballing it. Okay, so that should give us a smoother result. Yeah, that's much better. So if you actually take your hand, I do this sometimes, and block out the timeline at the bottom so you can't see when the animation is looping, and then just watch the animation move and see if you can predict where, I mean we know where, we know at which point the animation is looping, but if you can sort of pick it out with your eyes, if it's anyway obvious, then you need to adjust your looping. But it looks good, so let's export it and get it in game. So I'm going to hit export. Go to write to platform, and it's already, so I did hit yes to save configuration when it asked me to, so all I have to do is hit run configuration, and that'll export it here, and see the time matches, so we know it's the latest file. So if you are ever prompted to save configuration, you probably want to hit yes, because that saves having to repeat the file names. So just going to drag it into the path and hit replace, and let's see what it looks like in game. Okay, cool. Right, it looks like it's working perfectly. It will freeze every now and then because of the weapon idle ready A through D. I exported those from the template scene, so they don't have any keyframes, but yeah, we can see when the idle animation does play. It has a nice sort of breathing motion. If we take a look at a vanilla gun, we see that the breathing sort of goes sort of back and down and then forwards and up, kind of. So you can replicate that style if you want. But I've gone for a sort of looser style because I'm animating with one hand. I think I might reduce the amount of movement because it is a bit excessive. But for now, you can see that there's not too much jitter. If we had animated with IK, there would be a lot of jitter, and yeah, it wouldn't be very good. Alright, so that's the idle. Let's tackle a different animation.